لكن تحديت الظروف وخضتها وحدي صبورا مستعينا بالصلاة. كم مرة عصف الأنين بداخلي، كم مرة قد ذاق قلبي من أساه محن تمر، وكم كرهت مصابها.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's nearly been a month since the conflict of Gaza has started. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them victory. Nearly 10,000 people have died, or been killed, should I say, by the racist, Zionist, extremist regime. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about rectification and some sort of respite for our brothers and sisters who have been massacred. And it's a genocide, if that's not what it is already. And as I mentioned in my previous videos, the shift and the social media war of bringing about clarity and awareness to this conflict is really showing that the Zionist propaganda is not succeeding on all levels. And alhamdulillah, many videos have been circulated that non-Muslim men and women are picking up the Quran and reading it at all of the Iman, the faith of the Palestinians, the Muslims, in terms of adversary and tribulation. Finally, we have a self-righteous, pompous individual who mentioned some shocking statements. Now, as a disclaimer, this particular statement was made probably many years ago, and I haven't seen no retraction, no clarification from this said individual, Abdul Hakim Murad. Even worse, he was mentioning this point at the time when Gaza was going through its previous incursions and aggression by the Zionists. And let's just say that I am not snipping anything out of context. It's a speech that he did many years ago. Since my interactions with many brothers online and in person, I'm finding two camps. And they both are at each other's throats. One is the pseudo-Salafis who, knowingly or unknowingly, are pushing pan-Arabism because of their shilling for Gulf leaders. They exclusively defend Gulf leaders, even though they are bootlickers in essence. They shine the boots of the Gulf leaders more so, and they focus their energy on defending Gulf leaders. They don't really care about, the Bangladeshi leaders. They don't care about the Central Asian leaders. They don't care about the Turkish leader. They don't care about the Pakistani leaders, Afghan or whatnot. It's very much focused on Gulf leaders as a whole, and their whole methodology follows the political winds of their policies. And then on the other side, you find these Neo-Ottomanism or pseudo-Sufis as well, who they have their favorite, regions and leaders, i.e., you've got Syria, and then you've got Turkey, which is Neo-Ottomanism, and then also you have, the Hadramaut, Mutasawwifa, etc., etc. So it's basically fanaticism on both spectrums. What we'll do now is play the clip. And again, as a disclaimer, this clip was probably many years ago. I haven't heard no rectification since, nor an apology. But after you listen to it, you'll feel sick to your stomach. Have a listen.
The Ottoman Empire, it flourished. And it flourished until the dawn of our current calamity and our current puzzlement. In 1917, the three battles of Gaza splashed across our headlines at the time, but we have profoundly forgotten them. What were the battles of Gaza? The first two were between the British forces and the Ottoman forces. The Ottoman forces fighting for the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the British fighting for imperial glory. And the first two battles were won by the forces of the Khilafah, and General Allenby was soundly defeated. The third battle was different. The third battle introduced the principle that has characterized the tragedy of the region ever since. The tragedy of insincerity, of double standards, hypocrisy, backstabbing, and treason. The reason why the caliphal forces crumpled and were defeated in the region, having held them triumphantly for so many centuries against all comers, was not because they were incapable of dealing with these external enemies. They defeated the British at Gallipoli. Great humiliation. The greatest humiliation in the career of Winston Churchill was his defeat at Gallipoli. Despite all of the suffering that the empire had experienced, they could still defeat the British Empire, and the imperial troops were routed on the beaches of Gallipoli. They were doing the same at Gaza, and then something unprecedented in the history of Islam took place. And what was that unprecedented event? The great treason, al-Khiyanat al-Kubra. Who was it who was fighting alongside the British? In the propaganda portraits of the time, the British Tommy with his solar helmet, with the machine gun, the Lewis gun, pointed at the distant Turkish lines. And you can just about see the Tarbushis and the Ottoman army there. Who is feeding the bullets into the machine gun? It is the local Arab ally. That's the great treason. The uprising of Arab nationalists against the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam for the sake of British promises and British gold and the opportunity to sack Damascus. If you look at the pages of history in any civilization, you will be hard put to find a comparable act of treason. That is why the third battle of Gaza did not go our way, and why the story of the city ever since has been a story not of prosperity under a united Islamic realm, but of division, partition, occupation, and now catastrophe at the hands of a merciless, powerful oppressor. The obvious moral lesson for that is be united. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Hold fast altogether to the rope of Allah. At that most critical point of the history of the Ummah, one section of the Ummah, the Arab nationalist cause decided to change sides, to cross the lines and to fight for Whitehall against Istanbul. In our vision of history, that must be important, and perhaps that treachery, that insincerity, that hypocrisy lies at the spiritual heart of this rotten situation. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still angry with those people. So colossal was that betrayal, and so absolute was their rejection of the idea that they might even acknowledge that they made a mistake, that those people have been subjected to punishment after punishment after punishment. Not just the Palestinian people, but the people of the region more generally. Each one of the national stories of those new nations that so bravely, in their nationalistic, Arab nationalistic way, arose following the decline of imperial rule, has been more or less a shabby catastrophe. Scoundrels in uniforms, scoundrels with crowns, scoundrels wherever you look. The catastrophe of a people who don't seem to deserve that kind of torment. And it seems to become worse and worse.
Abdul Hakim Murad mentioned some pretty insensitive, disgusting statements. And it's as if he's propagating the original sin doctrine from Christianity and bringing it into Islam, as if the great-great-grandfathers of those Arabs, because he mentioned Arabs generally, and anyone that studied history, the Palestinians were very, very little in terms of their involvement of the Great Arab Revolt of Thawrat al-Kubra, as they like to call it. Now, what he's done, in fact, is quite disingenuous, because whilst we acknowledge the treachery of the Great Arab Revolt, I'll say that in brackets, what he failed to do was highlight the treachery from within. And this happened many years, probably 30, 40 years before the Great Arab Revolt. It's as if he's trying to portray that the Ottomans were sailing along so great up until 1914, when the Great Arab Revolt started. They were losing territory in the Balkans, they were losing territory in the Caucasus, they were losing territory very much, they were on the decline. But very interesting is to know that it was the actual Turks themselves, right? It was the Turks themselves that brought about their decline. So I'd like to ask Abdul Hakim Murad, and we're going to promote some facts on screen. I'd like to ask Abdul Hakim Murad, are you aware of the Young Turk movement that really weakened the Ottoman Empire, especially when you notice the evolution from its founding, how they were working in secret, the second constitutional era, how they brought about the Tanzimat reforms, the Firman, and what they included in these constitutional reforms, which were pretty un-Islamic, and they really weakened the empire. And due to their revolution, right, they brought about so much reforms in terms of secularization, in terms of social reform, and things that are pretty un-Islamic, especially when you look at the Tanzimat reforms, and which we'll get to. It's a bit disingenuous and deceitful to blame the Arabs and then enforce a original sin doctrine upon them that since 1914, 1918, and since that time they've been punished, especially Gaza, and even now, you know, what's been happening in Gaza since the last 20 plus days is because what their great-great-grandfathers did. Okay, absolutely disgusting. Let's present some facts to Abdul Hakim Murad. As you can see on screen, we've got the Young Turk Revolution and the Macedonian Question, 1908 to 1912. Okay, so this is before the Al-Thawratul Kubra. So chapter 1, the evolution of Young Turk thought and activity. So Ottoman politics in transition, the Tanzimat, which we're going to get to, and the rise of the Young Ottomans, 1839 to 1878. So this is their rise. So he mentions, in the Ottoman Empire, the political struggle against the autocratic rule of the sultans and for administrative modernization and economic reform according to the Western European model. So they were seeking, honor in other than Islam or the Khilafah. Really, what Khilafah? After, you could say, Sultan Abdul Hamid al-Thani, what Khilafah? They weren't ruling by the Sharia and whatnot. We'll get into the demand for reform in the alien country and the need to imitate the West in areas like agriculture, industry, justice, education, the army, science, civil rights, and the social and political system was so intense during the third decade of the 19th century that it could no longer be ignored by the Ottoman statesmen, many of whom shared liberal political ideas. What this basically entailed was the Ottoman Empire was on a decline because of Turkish nationalistic thought. This is just the evolution of it between 1839 and 1878. So before the dawn of Arab nationalism, which was a problem which caused a serious issue from Sharif Hussein, who was obviously from the Ashraf in the sort of Hijaz region. We're going to get to that. So to pinpoint the Ottoman decline on the rise of Arab nationalism in 1914 or 1918 is seriously disingenuous. And then to argue that the collective punishment of this original sin doctrine that today in Gaza or even before, all the incursions in Jenin, in Deir Yassin, all of this is a collective punishment. How insensitive. Do you know about the Nakba, about the massacres from Irgun and Haganah and all of the Zionist militias, all the massacres that ensued after the British mandate of Palestine? Oh, that's because the Arabs betrayed the Khilafah. Well, they were betrayed by the Turks themselves before the Arabs in 1914 to 1918. The Henry McMahon Hussein correspondence, or the Hussein McMahon correspondence, etc. So please, this is ridiculous, and this is this Neo-Ottomanism, and we're going to get to as well about the Ottomans and ridiculous concepts. And this is known. You are known for these ridiculous concepts. It's as if the white convert is coming to teach these uncivilized, ill-mannered, born Muslims this Western model, to argue the betrayal was so bad that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing the Palestinians and the Arabs generally. But there's one spectrum who are Ottoman fanboys or following Neo-Ottomanism, that they despise the Arabs. And again, part of it to do is because they're Salafists / Wahhabis. That's part of it as well. So you got that extremism. And then on the other side, you've got these, pseudo-Salafis, pan-Arabs, or pan-Arabism, who love the Gulf. And you got this clash. You see what I mean? You got this clash. What about this? So we're going to go into it in more detail to show you there was serious betrayal. Slowly but steadily, the Tanzimat managed to moderate somewhat the hostile Ottoman outlook vis-a-vis the West. The constant infusion of European ideas, goods, people and investment in the vast country more regularly during the second half of the 19th century encouraged that process. So a lot of it was to do with them feeling inferior to the European advancement. Continue on. The midterm effects of the Young Turk revolution, the thora of the Young Turk. So they revolted. What about that revolt? When that declined? And to add to this revolution, there was so much uprisings in the Balkans, and I'll give you one example. On the 3rd of May 1912, this is before the Arab betrayal. Let's look at the other revolutions or betrayals that were happening in the Ottoman Empire, starting within from the Young Turks. Okay, so you got on May the 3rd, 1912, 3,000 armed Muslim Albanians from the areas of Jakova and Ipek attacked local Ottoman troops, demanding equal rights with the Milisor tribes. 3 weeks later, the movement has spread into certain areas, I can't even pronounce their names, but worse was yet to come for the Ottoman cabinet and committee as the Albanian attack on the Ottoman authorities escalated in Macedonia, right? Before the Arab revolt. An underground organization, the Savior Officers, was coming into being in Constantinople, in Istanbul. Their aim was to end military interference in Ottoman political affairs and restore a legitimate form of government. In essence, this group operated as the military wing of the liberal opposition, the Young Turks, and had sympathizers in the Macedonian army. Apparently, it was this secret group that instigated a series of military mutinies in the Macedonian army. On May 29th, military desertions occurred at Frazovic, and by the end of July 1912, a large contingent of the 49th Monastir Regiment, headed by Tayyar Bey, abandoned its barracks and united with the Albanian insurgents. Young Turk evolution and revolution caused these uprisings. The series of mutinies caused great disarray in the Macedonian army, undermining the Ottoman authorities. Attempts to deal with the Kosovar rising, which in the meantime had spilled over into the southern western regions of Albania. In the mid-June 1912, Muradic and Milisor tribesmen joined the Albanian movement. On the 21st of June, these forces trapped an entire Turkish division in the northwestern Albania and marched towards Sukaturi. So come back to me now. The Young Turks were the catalysts that caused these uprisings. Liberal reforms, Tanzimat reforms. I'm going to get to the Tanzimat reforms later. Why is it that you are perpetuating the original sin doctrine on the Arabs? Okay, why? Why can't we argue, I'm going to get to later, that Ataturk was a result of these betrayals by the Turks? Okay, if you want to argue that because you're a follower of this Neo-Ottomanism, and the introduction of the new Turkish script, replacing the Ottoman Turkish, very influential in deeming Turkey into a secularist democracy. 270-page plus document. Anyone that's interested, it's a great read, and I recommend it to all to read the decline of the Ottoman Empire during the Young Turk revolution. So, adding on upon that, why is it not plausible if I use your methodology in how you promoted the original sin argument or doctrine upon the Arabs to this day, however long that was, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Why can't we add that due to the Young Turk revolution, this is a continuation, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing, the Atrak for this particular betrayal and this revolution, which weakened the empire so much to the point that it allowed the European powers to gain control of the Balkans and various other territories in the Caucasus and whatnot. You know what I'm talking about. So here are the influential members of the Young Turks. Okay, most of them were writers, politicians, and philosophers as such, and they basically were the key members of the Committee of Union and Progress, that particular group. And these are the ones that, and these are the men that brought about this, and these are the men that brought about the second constitutional era. So the Tanzimat reforms were changes from 1839 for about 20-30 years, and some of these reforms were like, introducing banknotes, post offices, and dress code changes and various other reforms. But in 1858, something very, very important was decriminalized, and that was liwat. Right, liwat was decriminalized in the Ottoman Caliphate in 1858. So when you talk about this betrayal and whatnot. What about that? Right? What about that? And various other reforms, if you want to go read, there was change of the national anthem and all of these sort of things about those who can enlist into the Ottoman army, and jizya and, taxes and everything connected to that. So, no, we'll ignore that. We'll just fast forward to the Arabs, Al-Thawrat al-Kubra, and Allah's punishing them to this day. You got obviously the monarchs were deposed of in Egypt and Iraq and Libya and various other places, and this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing them. So okay, I can argue perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing the so-called revivalists or these revolutionaries in the secular democracy of Turkey for their betrayal to the Ottoman Empire, because you were so keen on that, weren't you? Because they were Sufis, they were Maturidis, hence why you are focusing on this betrayal. Believe you me, if it was the other way around, if they were Salafist, you wouldn't really care. That's frank. That's a God honest truth. Now, what we're going to go into is certain statements that you made regarding Mustafa Ataturk, or Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Okay, so let's have a listen.
Mehmed Esad Erbili dies in 1931, who is one of the last really great Khalidi Naqshbandi sheikhs of Turkey, who had his own zawiya in Üsküdar and had been head of the majlis of the sheikhs that the Ottomans created before it was abolished. Ataturk, of course, had the sheikhs killed or imprisoned. And this one was particularly difficult because everybody loved him. He wrote the famous Kanz al-Irfan, which is a hadith collection. I've not seen it, but it's said to be a commentary on 100,000 hadith.
Heard, like Naqshbandi, Sufi, this Neo-Ottomanism, pseudo-Sufis, and you got the other spectrum I mentioned about these pseudo-Salafis, these, pan-Arabism and whatnot. So let's argue that due to the Young Turk Revolution and, the Tanzimat reforms and all the other reforms that were clearly un-Islamic, right? Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was a punishment, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was angry due to these betrayals that he sent the likes of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk to punish these Naqshbandi Sufi clerics. Why not? Based on your principle, why can't I argue that? Why can't I argue the deep-rooted secularist mindset of the Turks that's been ongoing for nearly a century now? It's because of the Young Turk Revolution and what's brought about, the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. Because the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a downfall because of the Arab Revolt. It was a point where they were on a decline, and yes, it kind of contributed towards the end. But what about all the other revolts in Albania, in the Balkans, and within Turkey? And little do you know, the Palestinians themselves were really non-influential in the Great Arab Revolt. And I'm putting it in brackets, the Thawrat al-Kubra. So why are you blaming them? Why are you blaming Arabs generally? It's absolutely ridiculous. Let's go into some other ridiculous statements. I could present a full archive of your ridiculous comments, but everyone knows. Everyone knows. And again, if they are the benefit of the doubt, what do you reach out to? I don't need to reach out to him. No, I don't. I can see where this Cambridge master is, where he's heading. There's no need. And these, enlightened, reverts are going to teach us, these uneducated, backwards, born Muslims, behave yourself. With this sort of rhetoric, we'd rather not keep that to yourself. Okay, let's listen to you.
So that's the funny thing. An empire, perhaps the greatest multicultural, stable empire the world has ever seen. A single family ruling from, 1280 to 1925, more or less incomparable. The British Empire lasted less than a century. The Ottomans, 6 centuries. Very impressive. Based on what principle? The principle of these Mevlevi dervishes, whose principle was, of all things, love. The Turks are warrior people, fighters. But the basic principle in all of this was ashq, or love, because of that hadith of the chosen one, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And when the Shaykh al-Islam of the empire saw the Holy Prophet in the dream, he saw him holding the copy of the Mathnavi. Something to remember. If somebody hasn't been given ashq, or love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when you have that the truth of it is that you love his creation. The one who really loves Allah loves others, loves his prophets, loves his awliya, loves their books, loves the ummah, loves creation ultimately.
So you heard. So ashq or ishq in the Indo-Pak subcontinent was the reason why they were able to hold an empire for 600-700 years. But nothing to do with futuhat and, you know, their capabilities, their military capabilities. Yeah, he did highlight that the warrior people was the love, you know, of these dervishes, these whirling dervishes, that, you know, someone had a dream and the Prophet ﷺ was holding something. I don't know what you mentioned, but you see what I mean? Like pandering to this sort of Neo-Ottomanism, you know, please, mate, give it a break. I know his fanboys and fangirls are going to come out and say, no, Haji, those comments were many years ago, etc. Okay, hypothetically, let's concede that for the sake of argument. This particular war that's happening now, just say it's not happening. Those 10,000 martyrs that are being killed, just say it didn't happen. Those comments that he made were at the backdrop of Operation Cast-Lead, Operation Protective Age, one of the Gazan wars that was happening, because he mentioned Gaza and then he resorted it back to the 3 Gazan wars, which, you know, the Arabs betrayed the Ottoman Turks. What about the Young Turks that I've just presented? Betrayal upon betrayal prior to the Thawrat al-Kubra or the Thawrat al-Arabiya in 1916 to 1918, and in between the Sykes-Picot Agreement was written. They are still insensitive and ridiculous. This, you know, original sin doctrine from Christianity, why you're trying to bring this into Islam, you're trying to add this into Islam, it's so insensitive. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still punishing them. So their great-great-grandfathers, and the Palestinians were hardly involved. If you know about the Thawrat al-Kubra, it was the Sharif Hussein, which we went into, and then his son Abdullah, and then they were betrayed because they wanted to be the kings of Syria, but the mandate already, Sykes-Picot Agreement already gave it to France. So then they settled for Transjordan. But what about the betrayals of the Young Turks, right? What about those betrayals that happened? Like the Macedonian project and all the other betrayals in the Balkans and whatnot. And it started way before the Thawrat al-Kubra. You know, the Young Turk Revolution was a catalyst for the Ottomans' decline. Then you had the Tanzimat reforms, which were un-Islamic for most of them from 1839 onwards. So why can't you blame the Turks? Why can't you blame them for the Ottoman downfall? Not to say that's an excuse, but at the end of the day, your Neo-Ottomanism is the reason why you're pointing the finger at the Arabs. You didn't go back to 1839 to 1878, then the Young Turk Revolution, the Second Constitutional Era. You ignored that. You conveniently skipped that part where the Ottoman decline was happening, the Russian-Turkish wars, the Balkan wars. No. The Young Turks, ignore them. They're not punished. They're not punished for their revolution. They're not punished, but the Arabs are getting punished for, you know, hundreds of years because of their betrayal to the Khilafah. Yeah, Rajul, what kind of nonsense is this? No. I completely understand. You know, the intellectual, civilized white revert is now going to teach these uncivilized, you know, brown Muslims about, you know, these events, etc. Because I am, you know, follower of this Neo-Ottomanism, this Naqshbandi Sufi way, and I have to blame these Arabs, Wahhabis, for their you know, betrayal to the Ottoman Khilafah. Yeah, right. Yeah, you didn't go back, did you? What about the other betrayal? Expecting any fairness from you fanboys and fangirls of Abdul Hakim Murad anyway, but this video has already confirmed so much historical facts which was conveniently ignored, but you wanted to blame the Ghazans and the Arabs for the punishment that's happening now. Like, this original sin doctrine makes me sick. So for the betrayal of the great-great-grandfathers to this day, which someone born 100 years later, they're getting punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the crimes of their grandfather. This original sin doctrine or concept has no place in Islam. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, or kama qal, إِذَا مَاتَ إِنسَانُ, when a person dies, or abd, or ibn Adam, different variations, إِنْ قَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ, that all of his deeds stop apart from 3. صَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ, the continuous charity. أو علم ينتفع به, or the knowledge that he benefited others with. أو ولد صالح يدعو له, or the righteous son that prays for him. So what's this concept that if a person does a bad deed 100 years ago, until, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives, however long that is, whatever that person did, his sons, his great-grandsons, his great-great-grandsons will get punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is Christianity. We don't believe this.
So fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to your fanboy fangirls, I expect no justice from you anyway. So decay yourselves. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad.
ليس الغريب غريب الشام واليمن إن الغريب غريب اللحد والكفن إن الغريب له حق لغربته على المقيمين في الأوطان والسكن سفر بعيد وزاد لن يبلغني وقوتي ضعفت والموت يطلبني ما أحلم الله عني حيث أمهلني وقد تماديت في ذنبي ويسترني تمر ساعة